Welcome, everybody, to the Growth Inflection panel on decoding carbon removal, covering air, soil, and water. We're really excited to have you here today. We have three panelists, which I'm going to let them introduce themselves shortly, but we've got Joe from Reform Carbon, we have Steve from Captura, and we've got Adam from Ion. Before we dive in, just to give you a quick background on Growth Inflection, I'm Alex Katzmann. My partner Stefan Laengin's also on the call. We started Growth Inflection to partner with early stage climate tech startups to help accelerate scaling go-to-market. And we've both been in the industry for a long time. We're really excited about the trends happening now with all of the acceleration with funding from IRA, and specific to this topic, you're starting to see more and more big deals of companies investing in carbon removal at scale. And today we're going to dig into that a little bit. So just from a logistics perspective, let's keep this engaged. So if you have questions or comments as we're going through, please drop them in the chat and we will try and work them into the discussion. And now with that, wanted to let the panelists introduce themselves. Just going to spend a couple minutes here. So tell us a little bit about your background, what your company does, and then specifically how businesses and consumers can benefit from your carbon removal solution. And let's start with you, Joe.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alex and Stefan. Great to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. So I'm Joe Norris. I'm co-founder and CEO of Carbon Reform. We are a modular carbon capture company, and our focus is democratizing access to carbon capture technology. So we are primarily decentralized CO2 capture. I guess I'm representing the air category for this panel. So my background is primarily materials science by training, and specifically polymers and bio-based and biodegradable polymers, as well as climate science. So prior to Carbon Reform starting, we started in February of 2020. Prior to that, I was working towards a PhD in material science engineering. And before that, I was working with mostly water quality technology. So I spent some time at a startup out of Brooklyn. And essentially my job was to build autonomous robots for deploying oxygen nanobubble technology into surface water systems that had been overrun with algae. So I kind of took what I knew from environmental tech and then polymers and adsorption and applied it to carbon reform. So for carbon reform specifically, our business model functions on co-benefits to commercial building owners, and I'll talk more about that later, but essentially business owners can make an actual return by implementing our technology that does not rely on access to carbon credits. So by implementing our tech into an HVAC system inside a commercial building, we scrub CO2, but we also scrub other types of contaminants from the indoor air, and we recirculate that air back as supply. And therefore, we can save energy on heating and cooling the outside air that typically needs to be brought into a building. So kind of an interesting take on carbon capture, and looking forward to addressing that more over the course of the hour.
Yeah, no, thank you, Joe. Excited to dig in. All right, let's move over to Steve.
Hi, I'm Steve Oldham. I'm the CEO at Captura. Bit on my background: before joining Captura in early 2022, I was the CEO at a carbon removal company called Carbon Engineering, which sold last month to Occidental for 1.6 billion. So I've been in the carbon removal sector almost about as long as anybody, given its relative early stage. Captura uses the ocean as a mechanism to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. The ocean is the largest amount of surface area we have on the planet, 70% of the world's surface. It absorbs about 30% of all emissions today. So Captura was founded out of Caltech University in California to look at, can we use the ocean's inherent ability to draw down CO2 from the atmosphere, but do so in a way that doesn't damage the oceans? Our process uses only renewable electricity and ocean water to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. We think it'll be one of the most scalable and low-cost solutions for carbon removal. And we need as many solutions for carbon removal as we can get. So I'm delighted to join my fellow panelists in being one of the innovators and entrepreneurs in this space.
Amazing. Yep. Definitely need as many solutions as quickly as we can get them right now. With that, we'll go over to Adam.
I agree. This is an exciting industry in part because you see the diversity of all these solutions. In the case of ION, we work with farmers and ranchers to remove carbon dioxide using an approach called enhanced rock weathering. We use, where's my hand, rocks like this, that when pulverized, they remove carbon dioxide, essentially through a charge balance process. So pretty simple chemistry, but brought to bear in a fairly complex supply chain, which is, modern agriculture. And so my background is as an agricultural scientist. So I have a degree in agronomy. Went on to get a PhD in Earth System Science, which, I came to understand how big the problem was. And then I went back down to that individual field level. So I started a company in digital agriculture and really came to see, what does it take to scale up environmental solutions is really around the adoption. And the center of our ecosystem is the farmer. So.
Great. Well, excited to have the three of you here. I will hand over to you, Stefan, to kick off the next section.
Yes, I start with a kind of a more general question. What are your thoughts on the current state of carbon removal technologies and their impact on the future? Joe.
So I think it's been interesting over the last even like 3 years to see the acceleration of all types of carbon removal technologies. And a big part of that is the building of an ecosystem of something that all of humanity needs, but that needs to function under capitalism. And so it's kind of this interesting dichotomy of, technologies, developing at varying rates, as well as all of these different business models and all of these new markets emerging. So it's been a really interesting thing to watch, especially because, I personally have been involved in climate and environmental sciences for about a decade, and I know these two have as well, maybe longer. But I think it's been very interesting to see how the collaboration piece is playing out among the different types of industries. Everyone on this panel is in a wildly different industry if you're talking about anything other than carbon removal, right? So I think it's ongoing, it's developing, and that's kind of my piece.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's there's also behind the question kind of, do you believe one technology will become the dominant solution, right? Kind of that's kind of Steve. I think you partly answered the question in your introduction, but I just wanna also ask you the same question like you.
Sure.
Yeah.
So in I think it was 2018, it might have been early 2019. I was asked to testify before a US Senate committee on carbon removal. And at the time in the testimony that I gave, I quoted that I estimated there were 250 people in the world working on carbon removal technologies at that time. Mm-hmm. There was really only 2 or 3 companies in the sector. Today, recently, I went to a Credit Suisse X Prize event. There were tens, if not hundreds, of companies in the carbon removal space. So this is sort of good and bad. Obviously, it's good to have more players at the table. It's good to have more good ideas and brilliant minds. The bad side of it is, are we too late? If I take a climate look at this, the state of the carbon removal industry is pitifully small, and it's way short of where it needs to be. The good news is, as Joe says, and I'm sure Adam would say the same, momentum is changing, but we have a seriously large problem to solve in a limited amount of time. And the industry isn't big enough, the support isn't big enough, the public awareness isn't enough. This is a truly critical problem we're trying to solve. So I think it's growing fantastic. It's infinitely larger than it was 4 or 5 years ago, but nowhere near big enough.
Okay. And Adam, what do you?
You present the humbling version of this, like the problem is daunting. For me, it's exhilarating that there's so many people working on it, and that actually we're at a moment where many of us are working within an industrial vertical. And so Joe in the built environment, ourselves working within agriculture, touching on, mining and transportation and farming. Of course, we eat goods that come off of fields. And so many of us, are also consumers. And if you think about, everything that I touch, how can that be decarbonized? Somebody has a company focused on that. And that's really exciting for me around, all the arrows in the quiver. As far as carbon removal, the state of play, I think direct air capture has done a magnificent job of, providing a charismatic vision of where it can go. And a lot of people think carbon removal is like that, plant in Iceland. And one of the more sort of challenging aspects is to sensitize a lot of people that the natural world has a lot of conveyor belts that also remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, be it land or the ocean. And it's intrinsically more complicated to measure. And so where I think if direct air capture is easy to measure, but it's hard to do, working in open systems, it's easy to do, but it's hard to measure. And that's one of the big trade-offs that a lot of people are looking at as far as how do we scale, and there's no real answer, is, how do we sensibly bring up the scale and the cost, leveraging these kind of natural and more, technologically focused systems. And that's like a very large conversation right now in the industry.
Thank you, Adam. And
great. Well, I think a natural transition that I wanted to make here is that when we talk about carbon removal, obviously we're focused on removing emissions, but by doing that, that's not the only benefit that happens. And when we're talking about tackling, climate change and a lot of the impacts that happen from emissions, there are lots of tangential areas that this interfaces with. So I wanted to move us to, and I'll have Joe, you respond to this one first. What are some of the other benefits? You mentioned co-benefits before that come about from your solution or from other carbon removal solutions that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, I can obviously speak most fully to my own solution. And in fact, the term co-benefits is almost misleading because it's essentially compounded benefits. So for us, when we capture CO2 in the sort of ambient open environment, right, as direct air capture, That's the main benefit, is that you're removing CO2 from the open environment. And it's a little bit harder to do because it's, more dispersed. And the primary benefit there is for the climate, right? When we take that similar process and put it inside a building and couple it with other types of technology that are already there, then we can actually compound the effect for the climate because of where we're doing the CO2 capture, right? So as I mentioned, when we capture CO2 and when we capture other types of indoor contaminants, so we capture VOCs, particulate matter of a couple of different sizes. We disinfect for viruses, bacteria, and other pathogens. And so it's comprehensive, right? It's comprehensive air cleaning with CO2 scrubbing. And that's where the energy savings is unlocked. It becomes possible to save energy at the full building level because of that process. And so in that case, the benefits for the occupant, right, are that the air is healthier. The benefit for the climate is that we're removing CO2 directly, but we're also avoiding a significant portion of upstream energy usage. So, if you're talking like tons or equivalent, it's about 2 to 3 times as much CO2 that is then avoided because of the reduction in energy usage on top of that amount of CO2 that's directly captured. And we actually permanently capture the CO2. So we react it into a mineral form. We don't compress it. We don't want to reuse it downstream. Again, because it's not part of our business model to do so. The commercial building owner or operator will pay for the service that we're providing, which is the clean air and the energy savings, right? So that allows us to function in this sort of other space where we're not just tied to these markets of, carbon credits and everything. Obviously, we'd like to take advantage of that too, and we're paying attention. But what we did was look at existing infrastructure and see what can we use that's already here. The plant in Iceland, Adam, that you mentioned, and other types of large-scale direct air capture technology use lots of energy. They use big fans. Buildings already have big fans. So we can just use that air that's already circulating inside the building. People produce a lot of CO2 inside of buildings. It's trapped in one place. The CO2 concentrations inside the building are up to 10 times higher than what they are outside. So that puts us kind of in between this like direct air capture versus point source, where people are the point source. And we're using, the infrastructure that already exists to make this problem easier to solve on a climate level, but then also solve additional problems for the building owners and operators because they want to save money and they want to qualify for LEED and they want to qualify for WELL certification. So that's kind of how we're approaching the co-benefits.
Yeah, no, that's great. And being able to stack all of these obviously makes the business case stronger, gives more different avenues and ways that you can grow profitably. And I assume for the building owner, having better air quality, it's better for their the employees and the people working in the building's health, which is obviously a huge positive impact as well. Be curious, Adam or Steve, are there any specific co-benefits from the water or air type approaches you wanted to call out?
Yeah, I can comment on the ocean side. So, one of the problems we have of increasing CO2 levels in the atmosphere is we're not just messing the atmosphere up, we're also messing up the oceans. So the oceans absorb about 30% of the world's emissions. Ocean acidification, coral reef blanching, ocean temperature increases, all of these are effects of the ocean's role of absorbing excess CO2. So our process actually helps with that because we remove CO2 from the ocean faster than the atmosphere can put it back. So we're always ahead of the game. As a result, we achieve localized deacidification of the oceans, which is great for coral reefs. It's great for fish. It's great for shellfish farming. So all of those various things, it will take us a very long time and an awful lot of Captura plants to completely reverse ocean acidification, because it's a big problem. But on a localized basis, we've had quite a lot of interest in that as a co-benefit of what we do.
Great.
We're on farmland, so this is where it might be easy to look for co-benefits. This rock is called olivine. This is about a 1-to-1 replacement for an input that farmers use already, which is calcium carbonate or ag lime. And so where calcium carbonate, the carbon in the carbonate comes off as carbon dioxide, this removes carbon dioxide. So the co-benefit is really in replacing this product that they use already. And why do they use it? It increases the uptake of essential nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. In tropical areas, it reduces aluminum-driven toxicity. One of the more interesting ones is, why is agriculture considered, hard to abate industry? Is that we use fertilizer. It's hard to farm without fertilizer. And that fertilizer emits a lot of nitrous oxide. And so one of the interesting areas that people are investigating is that the pH increase from adding this to soils reduces nitrous oxide emissions. And so there's a cascade of different benefits, starting with yield and ultimately altering, other biogeochemical pathways. It certainly raises the pH of river water, ultimately touching on some of the same ocean acidification trends. I think it's so small that it's hard to imagine that rock weathering is going to change the pH of the ocean appreciably. The one that I am most drawn to is that we're working with barge operators, maybe people who work at the port on the river, working with truck drivers, working with lime applicators, working with agronomists. So one of the key aspects of what we're doing, there's kind of a crisis of the future of work in rural America. As agriculture consolidates, there's a shortage of jobs. And one of the interesting things about enhanced rock weathering is really it leverages rural communities to be part of the solution. And it's very valued where we work in the Mid-South.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, obviously the core focus of getting carbon out of the atmosphere is on its own really important, but when you can kind of bring all these other things together, it's really encouraging. All right, back over to you, Stefan.
Yeah. We talked at the beginning about kind of that we have a awareness gap, so to say, kind of not enough people are really aware of what's going on in the carbon removal sector and how to really get involved and also get help. Steve, a question for you. Can you describe what is kind of the value proposition for carbon removal sector? So how we got this better sold to the population and to the outside?
Yeah, and it's always challenging because there are plenty of people who actually oppose carbon removal and carbon capture. So to try and give fairness to both sides of the argument, the carbon removal technology is not proven at large scale today. I think we would all agree with that. So people would say, given the urgency and the crisis associated with climate, can we rely on a technology that's not yet proven at scale as a critical part of addressing climate change? Which is a fair argument, but it's an argument for why you should accelerate efforts in carbon removal, not an argument to stop them. So for me, the value proposition of carbon removal is twofold. Firstly, if you can remove a CO2 molecule from the atmosphere and put it back safely, permanently where it came from in the first place, underground or back into the rock or wherever you choose to sequester, that is, from a climate point of view, the same as not emitting. And for many sectors of the economy, the cost and the feasibility of stopping an emission is really challenging. For example, aviation, I always use the aviation example. Trying to invent an electric plane or a hydrogen plane anytime soon is not happening. I don't think society is ready to be told all planes are grounded, you can no longer fly. So if you can't stop the emission, the next best thing you can do is remove it. And carbon removal gives you a tool to remove any emission from anywhere in the world of any type, but also any moment in time, which is the second value proposition. The first being it's a cheaper way, an easier way to eliminate many emissions in the near term. The second value proposition is removing yesterday's emissions. So every day that goes by, we add more and more and more to the climate problem already in the atmosphere. About 95% of the total climate problem caused by CO2 is already up there. It's already emitted. So if we can find a way to remove yesterday's emissions in a cost-effective manner, then we buy ourselves more time to develop the technologies, the social structures, everything we need to do to live in a fossil-free world, which has to be the future of tomorrow. So carbon removal does all those things for you. No amount of electric cars, hydrogen fuel cells, solar panels, none of those things remove yesterday's emissions. None of those things help you if country XYZ refuses to decarbonize. None of those things help you if a particular sector of the economy has no way to get off fossil fuels. Carbon removal gives you a ubiquitous answer to all of those. Of course, the cheaper it is, the more relevant it becomes, but we only get to cost effectiveness through deployment. So, moving ahead with deployment, moving ahead with supporting the companies that are looking at innovation in this area, in my view, gives you an extremely powerful tool in the fight against climate change. And for any company that's out there that is required to get to net zero by its shareholders, its regulation, its employees, whatever, having a mechanism at a fixed price of being able to eliminate any emission is very appealing. If you can remove your emissions for less, great. If it's feasible, if you can't, here's a solution that works for everybody. So to me, the value proposition is really clear. I understand the argument that, fossil fuels, we're not ready to eliminate them. We don't have the technologies, and maybe we should therefore stop using fossil fuels. To me, that it's just not feasible. So that's, in my view, the value proposition for carbon removal, and why I've spent the last few years of my career fully dedicated to trying to make it happen.
Thank you for your explanation, and I think the next question probably would be kind of how can we really get this message out, right? Kind of it's a really complex topic, and yeah, we need everybody to go in this direction, even kind of non-scientists and also less educated part of the population, right? So that's probably a huge task. Alex, do you want to continue?
Yeah, I think for kind of the next topic to dive into, wanted to get into the carbon credit markets and also some of the financial drivers behind these solutions and how folks are selecting what type of carbon removal to purchase. For this one, Adam, wanted to ask you a little bit of, there are a lot of technologies. We've got 3 very different ones out here today, all using different types of approaches. Cost structures are obviously different. How do you think about the various solutions that are out there, the different prices for carbon removal through those solutions, and what factors that the buyers who want to basically fund these investments in carbon removal are looking for?
Sure. It's an incredibly diverse market, and many of the buyers are approaching it with radically different lenses. Some are interested in, what's the price today? Others are price insensitive today, but we want to see that you're going to be not only low priced in the future, but also like how vast could this be? Some people are extremely sensitive to like the additionality questions, which is like, can I be sure that a ton really is a ton? And that means that they're not just focused on additionality, but the verification, the MRV. And this kind of pushes them towards, you know, technological solutions. Others, you know, there's a certain charisma of nature, biodiversity, you know, working in the global south, often we're like preserving natural resources. So those have a degree of charisma. There's some that say, listen, I'm never buying offsets. We're focused on decarbonizing our own supply chain. We're interested in insetting. And so whenever we talk to buyers, and you know, the buyers we talk to are in general corporations of some kind, usually large-ish to very large-ish, you know, they each have developed perspective on this. And often, you know, there's a time when they're evolving their perspective from what would have been like the first version is around offsets. Maybe this is focused on forestry projects, to now what's being called the flight to permanence or the flight to quality. That, you know, it's recognized that removals are more expensive or more rigorous in a lot of ways, or as Steve pointed out, they're like at a nascent stage, so there's a lot of like frontline engineering. So it's more expensive. So how do we develop a portfolio that, you know, has an increasing fraction of permanent removals relative to you know, nature-based offsets? And so each of those are as unique as the different buyers that we encounter. And in general, my message is that, you know, as individuals and as corporations, we need to be investing in the future. And so no matter how you develop your portfolio, you should like start to make some bets, because if we don't invest in the future, it'll never happen. And so this is like a very catalytic moment that we're seeing, that whatever your affinity is, be it like working within your supply chain, working within the buildings, working with like some next gen technology, really believe in it, because believing in it can make it true. You know, and I know that sounds like idealistic, but this is something where we're really like creating collectively the future that we want to have. And that's driven, make no mistake, by the buyers, you know, by making decisions and like engaging. And the suppliers like ourselves, like the panelists, are responding to that, you know, with everything that we've got. And so this is like an invitation to, you know, the buyers that are out there, really to be open-ended with what their goals are, but just to make a move. This is, I think, the big push that we're experiencing now in 2023, and onward into 2024, we'll continue to see a rising tide.
Yeah, and one quick follow-up on that. Do you see standards coming into play for helping basically give apples to apples comparison of all of the, you know, different types of carbon removal and the attributes you're talking about, to help guide buyers, so it's not so much of a, you know, you have to navigate all this landscape yourself?
I mean, the standards are being built at the same time as the supply is being built, you know, so we've got a legacy ecosystem of standards. So registries, like where those carbon credits are stored by standards. And just as an example, the International Standards Organization, ISO, they have a methodology for how to measure greenhouse gas accounting. So ISO is a standard. ISO doesn't have a registry. And so if you're a buyer, you want to know where, where's my carbon going to be listed, and ISO can't do that. And so you have various standards bodies, could be like Gold Standard or Vera or Climate Action Reserve. And in addition to, maintaining the methodologies, they're also adding in some of the other, aspects that we as a society want, which is like, is this not exploitative to people, who are involved in it? Where the industry is shifting very rapidly right now is that there's a new generation as we're shifting from offsets to removals. We're seeing the growth of new standards. Puro is one, isometric is emerging as another standard that are trying to embrace these new removal approaches, put rigor into the quantification, and then accelerate the, let's say the time between taking a measurement and issuing a credit. And that's historically been a massive bottleneck. We could be a great supplier, but if the standards bodies themselves are working with like clipboards and pencils, it's hard to really, move fast enough. And so you're seeing kind of the emergence of this digital monitoring and verification in line with a new generation of the standards bodies that we think is really exciting. It's like by no means the end story of what that market looks like, but I'm very excited to see that it's evolving very rapidly.
Yeah, great. All right, Stefan, over to you.
Yeah, I have a question, and probably I can ask this question. I should have asked it at the beginning, and that would have filled kind of the whole session. You kind of, if you look back and about your journey, and was there an event, an instance where your company faced a significant challenge in the journey, and what were the lessons learned from overcoming it? That's a big question, right? Kind of, and I need to ask you, Steve and Adam, the same. So you probably go a little bit kind of over time, but it's you know.
Do you want me to start? Or?
Yes, please. Yes, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So challenges. I mean, countless, 1,000. But I think one big one was potentially like, I've spent the majority of my time on this panel so far saying like, whoa, well, we just fit beautifully into the HVAC system and we use it like existing infrastructure. I think one of our challenges up front was trying too hard too early on in our development to fit really nicely into the kind of supply chain and manufacturing structure that typically operates for buildings. So we started working with like very large scale OEMs and very large scale companies very early on, like pre-seed stage. And that kind of led us into situations where, our IP was potentially like at risk, and just like our development was based completely around their timeline. And it was, we're a startup, we develop very quickly. And so, we were kind of pushed and pulled in multiple directions. And I think we just had to learn that like, it's okay to take a step back, especially when you're building a hardware, and figure out what it is that you actually want to build for your own company, figure out who your customers are, what do they need. And so that kind of puts us more in this like the hardware development like incubation period. And what it did was ultimately present another challenge, which is just like kind of configuring this entire supply chain to be carbon negative. But the way that we've gone about it now is a much different way than when we started. And so we have, a lot of detail that's put into where our materials come from, from cradle to grave and cradle to cradle in some cases, right? So figuring out our own emissions over the life cycle of the technology, but our entire company, and making a pathway and a plan for that to become carbon negative as we scale, and making that scaling in, you know, some kind of reasonable sense so that we can actually become a gigaton scale carbon capture technology, carbon removal technology, but still maintain our sort of decentralized, equitable, you know, part of our thing is really wanting to be accessible as a technology. And we have all of this other like health information, health benefit. And that was not prioritized at the beginning via the partners that we were engaging with early on. And now we've made it very clear to the partners that we work with that like, this is the information that we need from you. And if, you know, we're going to scale to the moon in the next 10 years, and if you want to come with us, you have to play along, basically.
Yeah, so we see this also in our engagements. It is a power play, right? Kind of there's VC is involved, and of course there's pressure to earn money, and you know, especially in the current situation and environment, sometimes even you have to show profit. So yeah, Steve, you probably have endless challenges to overcome doing your career, but the most significant one.
I would say the early days of financing the companies. I mean, Carbon Engineering spent, I think, 9 years as a small R&D company before finally we're able to take off and start looking at deployment. Captura is moving a lot faster, but I still think it's a challenge. You know, when I talk to investors, nobody really understands what the future carbon market looks like. Is it going to be $200 a ton, $10 a ton? The complexity of regulation in the field, the lack of standards, all of these things scare off the purely financial investors to a large extent, which is difficult. I have always a simple message to both. When you have the level of uncertainty, which I wouldn't dispute, there is absolutely uncertainty about what the future of carbon markets looks like. However, you know you need them. And if they're going to exist, back the companies that have the lowest cost of production and the most credible approach. Because then no matter what the price is, you're going to end up doing okay. So for me, I think we are still not in a situation where the financial community is seeing this sector of the economy as utterly critical and supporting to the degree that's needed. So I still see that as the biggest challenge. Obviously, there's some exceptions, there always are, but writ large, I think that's the largest challenge still.
Okay. Thank you. Should we, Adam, do you also, you probably also have significant challenges?
It's really, I agree that the finance piece is like the central challenge that we see, and I see just a slightly different lens. You know, for us, we have working capital. So, you know, if you're imagining a biochar plant, there's a big piece of CapEx, a direct air capture plant, there's a big piece of CapEx. For us, the CapEx is quite modest, but, you know, we have to pay for the rocks, we have to move the rocks, we have to distribute the rocks, you know, so there's this kind of working capital that gets tied up for a couple of years as the rocks are doing their business. And we came to realize, holy smokes, you know, if we have exponential demand, you know, sales, that requires an exponential growth in financing the working capital requirements of the company, which transitions the company into being, you know, in perpetual fundraising mode, which is nobody's favorite job. And we have to see that that's not sustainable if we think of this as an industry, to be doing this off of venture and to be doing it through equity. Like ultimately you have to imagine that we're going to be working with like off balance sheet finance, either through banks or green bonds or whatnot. And so the central challenge of our corner of the industry, and I don't think we're the only ones, is how to transition from an early stage kind of venture-backed, equity-funded startup into one that is working with like the larger capital system at scale. And that means just a massive amount of de-risking at each stage and comprehending, you know, who are the people who are across the table, how are they evaluating the risk reward profile? And that's just I don't know, it's not easy because there's parts of it that are engineering, but ultimately we're landing in psychology, perception of risk.
Thank you, Adam. I think we have to cut it off now. We are a little bit over time. It was a fantastic, insightful discussion. I could spend another 2 hours with you. Yeah, we will send and kind of 5 to 10 takeaways from this session and share it on LinkedIn. So watch out. And otherwise, I don't know, Alex, do you want to say something?
No, I mean, just thanks to Joe, Adam, and Steve. Great discussion. Thanks everybody for joining. We will be doing more of these, so follow us on LinkedIn, and obviously check out each of the companies if you're curious to dig in more. They're all doing amazing things, and hope everybody has nice holidays.
Yeah.
Great to meet everybody.
Happy holidays, and bye-bye.